Okay, so this is Series 2, Episode 5. I'm very pleased to be speaking with David Astle, and it's nice to see you for the first time because we have spoken before. I've been on your show a couple of times, but that was strictly audio only. So now it feels like I'm meeting you properly for the first time.
The alphabet engineer has a face, so I'm excited. I'm equally excited.
Well, in preparation for this, let's get straight into it, straight into wordplay. In preparation for this, I did some research, obviously, and I distracted myself by just playing around with your name. And of course, a palindrome came out. It's not very good, but I'll just say it as an example. It's live. David Astle melts a diva devil. But then I also noticed, and this might be read as a warning to people who are taking on your crosswords or trying to compete with you. Decode, lest David Astle decode, which is a palindrome by pairs of letters.
Yes.
And so I noticed that you have that unusual property. Your name has this strange, rare quality that it can be used in a palindrome and a palindrome by pairs. Now, most people won't find that interesting, but I do. And
I do too.
Hopefully you do.
I mean, to me, one of the celestial affirmations of what I do is why I do what I do is that my surname has, I think, 11 discrete anagrams using all 5 letters. And I make this humble brag that show me another, surname that does likewise. And I haven't found one. So I think that is also not just the palindrome, but palindrome by pairs felicity, but the fertility of those 5 letters in my surname alone almost whispered to me as a kid. So I'm going to stick to that little hokey theory because it's done me okay so far.
Yeah. Well, I was going to suggest something similar. Was it destiny that you would end up doing what you've been doing? And
possibly, or maybe density.
And yeah, so let's get started with this then. How did you become interested in this? I'm very interested to know if you started with crosswords and that sparked the rest of the wordplay, or were you first of all interested in playing with words and then discovered crosswords?
I don't know if you have the same brand name in the UK, but there was a very popular make of baby bottle. I think it was called Pyrex, Pyrex. And I was the firstborn of 4 kids. But so my mum presumed that this was normal. But when I was bottle feeding, apparently I was just caressing the letters and no other kid did it. And she went off to baby healthcare and every other kid just grabbed that bottle and sucked on that milk. But I was like a trumpeter and I kept on fondling the shape of the letters. And I know that seems a little, flimsy as an early sign, but I've always been fascinated by the shape of letters, let alone, what they mean when they coalesce and how they can mean something else when you shuffle them. So right away, it was the architecture as much as the semantics that drew me in. And that also rhymes with my crossword fetish. I just can stare at crosswords, not mine, that have been built by others, by just exquisite engineers, and look at the intersections and just goo and gar like a baby. And I look at the same way as I fell into your spell with the way you shape and manipulate words so seamlessly. I know how hard it is to make a palindrome. And so when I say that we are looking at our period's marvel in you, I'm genuine. I know that, you are one of a kind, and maybe I'm the same in having this weird combination of passions, not just as a crossword maker, but as a writer, journalist, communicator. It's all to do with words. my currency is words. So as long as language is at my fingertips, whether they're infantile fingertips or senile fingertips, I'm a happy man.
Yeah, and you're extremely accomplished as a crossword maker. How old were you when you first started making them?
No, it's an important part of the journey is when my mum was doing them as when I was about 10. She would do it as a sanctuary, do it as a means of getting away from the the hubbub, and I was always fascinated by them. And they had a certain association with riddles. I could see that the clues were very much like riddles, and I adored riddles as a child, and the way they could flip language on their head. So all those, again, those prop points, those cattle prods, just kept goading me into the chute. And when it came to starting to think about making my own, it was probably about 12 or 13. I thought, wouldn't it be fun to try and make one? It was all very juvenile, but you learn a lot, and also ended up being a tight ass present that you could give to mates. I don't think they were very impressed by it. But then I got an opportunity at when I was about, I think 13 or 14, and we had a teacher who said, just do something with your time. I don't have a lesson today. He was a relief teacher. And he looked around and saw a crossword in a newspaper. He said, well, make one of these. So I did, and I gave it to him. And it was the fact that he typeset it or just printed it out and duplicated it across the school. I don't know if you can, probably you do, appreciate the rapture that you feel when you see that your work, which you have been, doodling over, is suddenly, looked at by a wide audience, and your subterfuges are fooling thousands or making others gape. That is very powerful juju. So at 13, 14, I thought, this is really what I want to do with my life. If not entirely, then certainly it's an important part of it. So I kept pestering the editors of the main paper in Sydney where I was living. And they eventually succumbed when I was about 21, and they gave me a break when I was about 22. So that was my first crossword. I think it was 1983. And that's now sort of almost 40 years. So it's quite something.
Yeah, and I do know exactly what you mean. And I think it's true of any art form, I suppose. If you make something and then people respond to it, it's always nice. But with the sort of things we both do, it's such a solitary exercise. It feels like you're the only person in the universe when you're working on it. So to then have it presented to the world and for the world to respond positively, like you say, juju. And
you just reminded me too that I think I'm coming up to my 10th birthday on Twitter. And I realized just how important Twitter's been in keeping my momentum and finding kindred spirits like you and many others. I have to say, there's such a joyous philological band out there on the the social web. And likewise, chat rooms, for the last 20 years, crosswords were privately dissected and resented and celebrated. But now with these forums, you get in real time a chance to see how people are responding to your work, and it's not always flattering, but it's always insightful.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, not always flattering. Most of the time it is, thankfully. The trouble is that you always remember the ones that aren't flattering. for all the compliments you can get, you're always going to remember the ones that aren't so complimentary. But
particularly if they're true. If they say this guy's showing off, or this clue, I think he did this before in 2011, and you think, well, I think he's right actually. So it's the brickbats that actually hit you. Hopefully you can learn from, and the bruises can be positive. But vitriol will always prompt a letter more than sweetness. So that's something, when you do see something that you love and admire, it's all the more reason to let that create a name.
Yeah, overall, I do love Twitter, and it's done wonders for me. It's connecting me to people like you, to so many people. And of course, I'm involved in the poetry community. I'm not so involved in the crossword community, but I imagine that similarly, you're going to make a lot of friends, and a few enemies, perhaps, a few detractors.
Detractors, protractors, contractors. Yeah, it's all these tractors are good tractors, right?
So let's talk about the crossword community, and in particular, what people expect from you in a crossword. Because the way I understand it, there are certain ways you're meant to write crossword clues. And if you step outside those bounds, people get disappointed. But at the same time, if you're going to be innovative in your art form, you have to be pushing those borders. So I'm very interested in how you go about that.
That's a very shrewd question, Anthony. For someone who is not part of the crossword community, that's a very knowing way of understanding the tension between the the discipline of a crossword clue and then the potential of a crossword clue. That is, there's two schools in crossword history, and one is the Zimmernian school, which is about how the grammar of the wordplay needs to accord with the grammar of the clue, and there is not a word wasted, that it must mean what it say and say what it means. And then there are what's called the Araucarians or the Libertarians, and that's in honor of the great Araucaria, who was a real inspiration for me. The Guardian Centre, John Graham, Reverend John Graham, and he was what's the best word of he was a dissident or a mutineer, but he still saluted the flag, even though he was trying to take the ship onto really new oceans and risky reefs, because he was, at heart, he was a poet. John Graham, I believe he had that touch, that muse, to be able to not just rubberize English, but also to just fondle with allusion and echoes, and what he could do with a simple word, just convert it like alchemy into something wonderful. But he wasn't always loved, and while I'm not going to say I walk in his shoes, I am very much in his camp, and occasionally a clue that I'm trying to do something a bit different with. It won't work for everybody, but you're quite right. I don't want to just always provide a clue that we've all read before. Innovation is a very important part of clue making, because we're a crossword solved in an inn, a tavern, and the best of them get ovations. So innovation bring innovations.
Yeah, and it is an art form, and that's clear from the effort that goes into these clues. And you mentioned not a word wasted as one of the principles, and that makes it poetry, essentially. And I know that in the practice of writing palindromes, that's a very important thing. It's conspicuous when something doesn't actually relate to the topic of the palindrome. You can tell that's just there for the sake of making the writing easier.
I'm making a crossword for my mum. In fact, the same woman who taught me how to make crosswords. She's turning 90 in June. Don't tell anyone. And I'm making a crossword for her. I don't think I've ever made a crossword for her, so it's taken my time. And I'm really unhappy that one across is macaw. And the reason being that all the other down words are all about her. But this Latin American parrot, it doesn't really relate to my mum, but it does start with ma, and it does end with core, and she's at my core. So maybe I can make it work, but I do know that is the macaw in the room. I know it in your palindromes. I can see those difficult decisions and how you have tried to cover over the seams of a word that might be a little bit more inapposite.
Yeah, and the difficulty is that you can end up convincing yourself that it makes sense, but you've got to convince other people, really.
Yeah, I'm looking at a parrot and I'm thinking I might have to re-engineer that corner. That's what I realised. And I don't, not that I'm lazy, it's just that I know everything else is beautiful, but in the end, I've got a Brazilian parrot I need to deal with, or maybe I need to set it free. You know, if you love something, set it free. And if you realise that something's got hairs on it or feathers, release it.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a balancing act, isn't it? On that topic, there are certain types of clue. Obviously, the ones that I like are the anagram-based ones. Perhaps we could go through some of these. Well, let's start with the anagrams, in fact. What makes a good anagram clue?
There's a theory that every cryptic clue is like two lengths of sticky tape, and that they're sealed together. And one length is the definition, and the other length is the wordplay that gets to that same solution that the definition defines. So if you look at a beautiful anagram clue, it's one where you can't see the seam between those two strands. It's like when you get some sticky tape and you can't find that, I think it's called the selvage, or that lip of the tape. That's the best kind of clue, because you don't know where one part starts and the other part ends, and vice versa. So there was a beautiful clue. In fact, it tells me I've got a bunch of, I always keep clues because I just marvel at them. And I'll find you a really lovely anagram clue. That's not mine, which is important. This is from the Times. Doctor accepted as trainee astronaut. Reads beautifully. Doctor accepted as trainee astronaut. Fantastic. Congratulations to the doctor. But you've got to realise that doctor is also a verb telling you to corrupt something. You might doctor the policy statement. And when you doctor accepted as those 10 letters, then you get a trainee astronaut, which is a space cadet. But the surface of the clue is so seamless that all you're imagining is this GP who's got the call from NASA. They've got they're off and away in 3 months. Couldn't be happier for them. But don't be fooled by the narrative, because that's what cryptic crosswords rely upon their solvers. They want you to be distracted by the timeless enticement of story. But these aren't stories. These are traps. And to fall for the narrative is to fall into the trap. It's a beautiful anagram, but this is what's wonderful about crosswords and the crossword community. Those sorts of anagrams you will find every second day, because the best setters take a lot of time in their engineering to make sure that those two parts dovetail with no rule violated. And you will appreciate dovetail and violated are anagrams.
That's great. And yeah, you mentioned there the double meaning in doctor. That tends to be, even though I should see it coming, whenever I see a good crossword clue, I seem to fail on that level every time, not spotting the double meaning. And obviously it's in almost every clue. It's there.
It is. It's the the duplicity of English, and it's what in any language, it's what the crossword setter thrives on. And you need to, so when you are trying to solve a clue, don't read it as an entity. Focus on each word and think about its potential, its polysemy, its other ways of existing in the world. And you'll realize that so many other words have got other guises. And also too, there's the whole bit of realizing that this could be an anagram. Accepted as has 10 letters. Doctor is a potential signpost to mix. So it's kind of knowing the landscape of a clue.
Yeah, so we have anagrams. We also have a few episodes ago, I was speaking with Ben Zimmer and Eric Chaikin, and we talked about crosswords then, and they were talking a lot about letter banks, which I understand is a relatively new tool for crossword setters. So this is related to a lipogram. So it's essentially that all the letters in the clue belong to one key word, and the word is the solution. Is that right?
It is a relatively new device in crossword, the crossword world. You know, I suppose there have been there's been plenty of websites that have played around with letter banks, you know, for the last 20, 30 years. Puzzability is one of them. They may say, using the letters of Stein as often as you need, can you make an 11-letter part of your body? The answer is intestines. So what Eric and Ben are talking about is converting that device into a crossword context. So you might say with that, little piece of business that guts needed to swill Stein twice. So you need guts, intestines, to swill Stein, the letters of Stein, twice. So then you'd get intestine. So it's like an augmented anagram. It's a lovely toy to play with, and I'm really thrilled that it's becoming more commonly known. So it gives me license and more gumption to use it. But I tend to play with it on Twitter, but I haven't really made it a big thing on the puzzle page yet.
Did you just come up with that now, that clue?
Yeah.
Wow.
We
have to talk about the obsessiveness of this, and I'm just as guilty here.
You are.
How it can take over your life, and you can just constantly be looking for these things. And is it helping?
Even when you said obsessive, I just thought, well, obsession is a good example of a letter bank because you've got snob, i.e. So you are continually squeeze boxing words, turning words inside out. You're playing with words intestines all the time. Their meanings, their architecture, it never stops. And when there's a new Olympic champion or a new politician, straight away you look at their potential for what they bring to the to the puzzle heads.
Yeah. Does their name work in an anagram or palindrome?
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, do you find some of the problems I have? It's very difficult for me to read anything because I have to read everything twice. I have to read it forwards and then backwards, and sometimes I have to muddle things up even further, and I can end up reading a novel and spending 10 minutes on page 1.
Yeah, snap. It has become a problem. Become a space cadet. When you know that I've read a book, at least if it's mine rather than a library book, because I have just doodled in the margins all the way down. Space cadet 5.5 accepted ? But it's often why I'm a very, very big reader, but towards the end of a long day, I will pick up a book that has got a strong narrative, crime book, spy book, adventure, yarn, travel book, because having made all these deceptive narratives, throughout the day, and also on the radio, words. I just need the comfort of stories and a good narrative. I'm not looking at the topari of the alphabet, but I'm lost in what's going to happen next. So always kudos to the novelist or the travel writer who can bring that effect. Yeah,
during the lockdowns of the last couple of years, I bought a treadmill because I couldn't go to the gym. So
Anagram of I melt lard. Go on.
So I found that, you know, I needed something to do while walking on the treadmill. So I started listening to audiobooks, and I found that that's a solution. Like if I listen to audiobooks instead of sitting there reading the book, that helps.
It's a good tip. But the other thing I also do, I just finished reading the selected works of Wendell Berry, the American poet. And I mean, poetry in particular, I would never want as an audiobook. I just have to see how it's been aligned and arrayed, and how he, in this case, has chosen, you know, the language. But I'm a great quote hoarder. And I think audio is a great lead for me, and I should consider it more. But I also love taking quotes away from a book, like a bowerbird, and just think about, savor the way that those words or ideas have been composed.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you about poetry. Definitely, I want to see it on the page. I want to make up my own mind how I choose to read it.
Yeah, yeah, and aloud. I feel like poetry always has to be read aloud. I don't know why that is. I think because it's as much about sound and cadence as it is about, you know, semantics and word selection. So I've just had a week's break, and I did read quite a bit of poetry, because it means I can sit out in a garden and, you know, recite, just hear the language.
Yeah, so you really are interested in language on all its levels.
Yeah, pretty much. Even, you know, jargon and cliche intrigues me too, about how they've become like that. So yeah, I am. You know, for the last 13 or 14 years, I've been writing a language column every week for the 9 newspapers, the Sydney Morning Herald. And when I, you know, was given that commission, I was thrilled. And then, you know, a day later, I thought, oh my God, you know, am I going to run out of ideas? No. My last one talked about a beautiful phrase that Anthony Birchfeld, who was the former editor of the Oxford English Dictionary. He calls English the never-ending raggedness, and it's that bounty and that generosity that will always give you, you know, new ideas, new toys, new caverns to explore.
Yeah, I read your article earlier in the year about Wordle, which I seem to have mentioned on every episode in this series so far, because
Sure.
it just appears as this strange thing that, well, why is everybody so obsessed with this all of a sudden? I thought it was only nerds like me who are meant to like this, but everybody loves it.
Yeah, it's a crossover. Yeah, it's found, you know, the big pool, the big pond. But you know, I know why it's popular. It's that, you know, the fact that it's shareable, that it's drip fed, that it brings this beautiful little sort of oxytocin hit when you get those, you know, that bank of green. There's something that's very distilled and simple about it. It's meditative. Everyone has these theories that is kind of fun. It's connective. You know, I've kept in close contact with my daughter who lives out of the house these days, just by doing a little bit of how'd you go? You know, got it in 3 here. Just not boasting, just saying. But then it's, you know, a chance for us to saying, how you going? How's work? Did you catch up with your friends on the weekend? That's all Wordle. So Wordle has kind of kept us connected, kept us focused, kept us joyous, and it's no wonder it's gone bananas.
Yeah, it's a good way to start the day, and it doesn't take very long. You know, win or lose, it doesn't take very long. So,
no.
So well, yeah, we should get back to crosswords, because I have many questions on crosswords. I'm just going to check my list. Okay, I saw something again, like in the research. There's an issue around whether or not to use proper names in crossword clues, and I think you've said that it's fine, and other people say no, this is a taboo, or something that should be used sparingly. And that made me think about what I do about, for example, palindromes, where if suddenly Edna appears or Otto appears, it might look like you've just done that for convenience. But then at the same time, if you're writing a palindrome on a specific topic, it's actually a good idea to bring in as many proper names as possible, just to show that you've thought about the subject and you've discovered something in the vocabulary around that subject that actually works. So then it becomes a positive.
Yeah, well, your Idris Elba is the salient example of that. Beautiful palindrome, one of the wonders of yours in recent years. Playing around with Idris as possibly being the next James Bond. It was just perfect because he was one of the names that was being floated around. He has got amazing anagram sort of malleability and palindrome potential, and so I'm of like mind. But it does put this really unusual acid test on a person's fame, and I am using inverted commas here because as a huge fan of American crosswords, I really admire the work of Patrick Berry, because I mean, look, there are so many fine setters. Brendan Emmett Quigley, I really love. Patrick Blindauer, Patrick. They're all the Patricks I love, but when it comes to the quarterback of the St. Louis Cardinals in the 50s, I'm thinking, yeah, that's not going to work for someone who lives out of the States or someone who's 25. And so when I select a proper noun and person's name in particular into a crossword grid, it's not done flippantly. I have to think, okay, so what's the pros and what are the cons? How well known is this person? There's a pop singer here in Australia, and her name is Amy Shark. And when you say that name aloud, it sounds like a rescue boat that the Mennonites have put together, an Amy Shark. And I just think that's so funny. But for all her talent and her, #1 hits here in Australia, will most of my setters know her? And will they know her in 5 years' time if this crossword gets a reappearance? Amy, if you're listening, I love your work, but I did err on the side of caution. So those sorts of decisions I'm making all the time. And there's a very pugnacious and shrewd journalist here in Australia who has become very prominent because she does really prosecute the claims of politicians in ferocious and eloquent fashion. Her name is Laura Tingle. And, how could you not want to play with that name? Because Laura is an anagram of oral, and tingle is actually an onomatopoeic, sound of word. So, and also she's got rating in her midriff. And rating, again, is a lovely word of both someone who berates, someone who chides, but also she works in TV, and TV is all about your rating. So it's almost posterity be damned. That name needs to be, anointed.
Yeah, and so rating, that's another example of one of the staples of crossword setting. But what is it called? A hidden, or I suppose in poetry we call it, in wordplay we call it a redivider, or perhaps sometimes a charade, where you're splitting up the letters and then throwing them together.
Yeah, that's you've just mentioned two types of recipes. They're different. But they do relate, because Laura Tingle's a nice example, because she is a vehicle for a hidden clue to hide rating. So Laura Tingle, rating sits inside her name, just in the same way that Peter Ustinov hides rust, or Roger Moore hides germ. So that's a hidden. But then you look at something like, you know, a person's name that could well be a, you know, hidden vehicle. Like, let's stick with, let's do Laura Tingle. I think it's, you know, she's become a meme all of a sudden on this podcast. So she would be, you've got LAU to work with. So that could give you L, which is 50, and AU, which is gold, or maybe it's City Union, LAU, rating. And now what's left is LE, which is, you know, the French, le, or maybe it's, you know, the, you know, ends of luggage, or the middle of select. I mean, you're just continually thinking, how can I signal these chunks of language in eloquent and inconspicuous ways? So when you think about the middle of nowhere, I think about the letter H.
It's fantastic. I'm intimidated by the way you're thinking here, and other people must be too. I mean, what's it like? What the community of crossword setters, is it really competitive?
I wish there were more opportunities for crossword setters. I really do, and because when I do my clue comps on Twitter, I'll throw out a phrase like, you know, pub test. I don't know if you have pub test in the UK. It's this notion of, you know, will a new idea be accepted widely by, you know, the Senate of the bar room? So it's when things are prosecuted by the village. And so we call it a pub test. Will it pass the pub test? And I just put out, okay, who can come up with the best cryptic clue for pub test? And almost within 20 minutes, someone responded with a barometer. And I'm thinking, that's just so good that A, I want to steal it, but I can't, because now everyone would see the plagiarist that I would be. And B, that's to me evidence that there are so many great setters out there that aren't getting regular work, because that frustrates me. Though, you know, I always encourage people the same way that, you know, you and I have discovered each other. Use social media, you know, use websites and blogs and chat rooms to, you know, flaunt your wares, and people will notice you, and then they will find you in the same way that Idris Elba and you know, luminaries have found your work and let people know about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So my own experience with crosswords is, well, I don't play them regularly at all. So here's the thing. I feel like, and maybe this is a poet's thing, I feel like if I'm going to spend that much time focusing this much effort on something, I want my own unique creation at the end of it, rather than solving somebody else's. I feel like I would be more likely to want to be a crossword maker than a crossword player. But I get the impression you do play a lot of other people's crosswords.
Yeah, we call it solving in Australia. It's actually, you know, shibboleths. There are two shibboleths in crosswords. One is people say you play crosswords instead of solve them, and they also say questions instead of clues. But I'm sorry, that IE snob obsession, that's me there.
Well, you can tell already then that I'm not a regular player. Oh, solver.
Yeah. Solver, there you go. I am. Look, I'd solve, you know, 4 or 5 crosswords a day, easy. You know, on holidays are probably, you know, half a dozen. But I have become something more of a connoisseur in the last, you know, 10 years, because I realise life is short. And I take your point about, you know, devoting all your energy into something that, you know, is, well, for me, it's something that's laborious. You know, life's too short for things that don't give you, you know, that don't edify, that don't extend and challenge, or don't delight. So you look for those things that can do, you know, one or all of those things. And with crosswords, I'm not gonna throw shade at some setters, but you know, there are other setters that I cherish, really cherish. You know, I suppose I could say in the Guardian, it's Pickeroon, I think, is a really fine setup. Love his stuff. And Paul has been a long time favourite. There are many others, but those two I will make pains to seek out. And the same goes for the, I mentioned Patrick Berry. Matt Gaffney is another one. Brendan Quigley. And I also love really tough crosswords. I like the Genius in The Guardian. I like the Thursday, Friday, New York Times. Because I'm not sure if this is answering your question, but they give me as much insight and endorphins as they would when I'm setting my own. And also, it's kind of, you want to see what the what your peers are doing. And when you see Pickeroon playing around with, I've got one here of Pickeroons. It's, like the answer was investor, right? I'm telling you this because that kind of word comes up a lot. Like a carpy and like inept. There are these words that just, I suppose, in an American crossword, look for desserts along the bottom or stressed because, it's all those soft landing letters. But someone, who's a real wizard with words will, finish on a word like, I don't know, Naomi Osaka. And you think, oh, that is really thorny. How did you manage to, have her as a landing pad? I really admire that. And so for me, the measure of a crossword in an American setting is how difficult did you make that mesh? And the second for a cryptic setter is what did you do with a familiar word, with a word that's been overused? And what Pickeroon did with investor is a really good example. I've got it here in front of me. I'll just read it out as a narrative. One seeking return home, vacillating over crossing street. And you think, where's the sticky tape scene? Where's the beginning and end of wordplay and definition? It's a clever definition, one seeking return. Beautiful. Home, having that word sitting so close to the definition makes that seam vanish. One, because you read it as one unit, one seeking return home. That's not. It's one seeking return, definition. Home is in. Where's Anthony? He's in. He's home. Then you've got Vestor to work out with. Now, you could do Strove or Voters. He didn't. He went for vacillating over. So that's telling you to mix the letters of over and you cross the street. So over in mixed form, crosses or bridges, ST. So you have got this notion of someone who is like Odysseus, returning from Troy, trying to work out where Penelope is. But that is the beauty of the deception. A familiar word with real zest and innovation in a clue. That's why I turn to the setters that I trust and love. And, Pickeroon is one of those for that reason. It just brings new luster as a result to a word that I know as part of the furniture, but he makes the furniture feel a whole lot sexier.
It's wonderful that there's so much mutual respect among you all, and I can tell your enthusiasm here for what other people are doing rather than just focusing on your own craft. So historically, there are famous crossword setters and there are famous crosswords indeed. Are there any you've made that you still think about and think, well, that's going to outlive me? That's a great crossword.
Yeah, look, I'll probably obviously the right answer would be it's for others to decide, but I did make one very early on, which I think I've got somewhere. I'm not convinced that I've got it in my archives, but I did make one when I was in my, I don't know, sort of during the 90s, so early 90s. And I played around with no animals were hurt in the making of this crossword. I actually just put that phrase in the crossword. And then I made an anagram of that phrase. This is all pre-algorithm, just entirely with pencil and paper. And it was all to do with cats and dogs. And it was incredible. If someone's got that crossword, I'd love to, see it again, because it did actually get picked up in, I understand a British setter came across it and thought this is just so wicked and beautiful. But then there was one I made in the, I think the early 90s, so 2002, 3. Again, I was breaking rules where the theme was circumnavigation, which happens to be 15 letters. So, or was it circumnavigator? Anyway, do the maths on that. Navigation, yes, no, that's, it must be circumnavigator. And anyway, I wrapped it around the crossword in a kind of tourist fashion. And I thought, well, why stop there? I had all the entries that related to going around the world, you know, sort of equatorial Guinea. They were all just wrapping all the way around the puzzle, like around the negative space behind the grid, coming out the other side, backwards and forwards. And as many people love that as they resented it, because it was, you know, breaking the rules. So I'm still very much an envelope pusher, but I'm wary about going too far beyond the horizon, because, you know, I don't want to alienate, you know, the many solvers that come to my puzzle. So I'm always playing around with that that liminal space between what's acceptable and what's just far too outlandish. And one thing that people don't, that really polarizes people, and I've actually stopped doing it, is where the answer is not a word. For example, if I was playing around with animal sounds, I might observe that homeowner has got meow inside it. So what I'm asking you to do is replace the animal sound with the animal itself. So you put in what would be ho cat no, because you've replaced meow with cat. Now I think that's fair game. That's funny. That's a bit of you know, seeing how malleable English can be. But yeah, there's probably just as many solvers who think, ho cat no, what is this? You know, Klingon. You know, and you alienate them. So you've got to work out what's okay and what's you know, KO.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I'm focused on at the moment is coming up with new constraints. I've developed a couple recently, one where you have only 2 vowels and they have to alternate throughout the poem, or there's one where I have every 5th letter has to be the letter E. I imagine that's the kind of thing that people would hate you for if you try to do a clue based around a new constraint. So there is still this desire to just stick to the staples.
Yeah, but one thing I've discovered in the last, you know, for me, yeah, what's given me new exuberance is, even though I'm not putting ho catna, so to speak, in the grid, I'm realizing that if you have a constraint that's within the rules of the theme. I'm trying to give you an example. Okay, so I've got one that's coming up. When is this podcast going to air?
Hopefully within a week. I think.
Well, I'm asking that because I don't want to give things away.
I could delay it. I could delay it if you like.
No, I'll give you another example. So if the central phrase was no ifs, ands, or buts. So what I say in my stand first, which is the instructions that sit above the grid, I say that I observe 9 across in all my wordplay. So when you come across a word like, you know, petrify, that's got an if in it, but I have the rare pleasure as a setter of composing a clue for petri, because I have dropped the if. So I have observed the rules of the theme, and that creates terra nova in the same way as your constraints create a new way of seeing the world. And it does for in a crossword sense too, because no one has ever had to clue petri before, because it's not a word. But now that in the same way that with sandwich, I have to clue switch, S-W-I-C-H, because I've dropped the and, no ifs, ands, or buts. So cluing petri and switch, no T, is that's kind of really fun, because I feel like I'm an explorer. I'm crossing a new terrain.
And that's what keeps it interesting, isn't it? Trying to do things that no one's done before, but within the familiar context. I mean, that's how I like art in general, and I can see that so do you, and you're doing such excellent work with it.
Thank you. No, it's true. No, I love how you are creating new forms. It's I try and do the same in crosswords, because it keeps the love alive.
Yeah, and it's there for the future, so that they're for other people to then be inspired by, and they can try out their own variations on it, and that's what keeps things moving forward.
Well, the Wendell Berry, getting back to the poetry I was reading, he's talking about, if the work of one person's life is picked up by another person, that is the rhyme in the immortal song, or worse to that effect. I don't have the quote in front of me. I did write it down though. But it's this notion of, what beachheads you're making as a palindromist and as an artist of restraint. It will be furthered. I'm sure it will be. And the same for a setup. You see what I've done with my brief candle. Good luck to you with yours.
Well, we should talk as well about all the other things you do, because of course I mentioned at the start that you interviewed me on your radio show, and I know as well that you work on letters and numbers, which for a British audience it's countdown. I saw an episode again as research for this, so I know it's exactly the same format as countdown. Which is what I watched a lot when I was a student, when I should have been going to lectures.
So did I when I was meant to be backpacking. I just stayed home and watched, Carol Vorderman do her work.
Yeah. So how did all the crosswords lead to this then? To both of those things I mentioned, to the TV show and the radio show.
When Letters and Numbers was looking for a dictionary arbiter, they went looking for linguists, and linguists. Some of my best friends are linguists. I'm not a professional linguist, but the Macquarie University, who is wrongly conflated, because it was historically true but no longer, as being the creator of the most prominent dictionary in Australia, the Macquarie Dictionary. So the producers, in all their wisdom, thought, a linguist from the Macquarie Dictionary would be the person, because that's the dictionary, linguist. And it just so happened that I had been making for the last 10 years for the linguistic newsletter for the Macquarie Dictionary, for the Macquarie University, for very humble pay, but I liked the job. I've been making this theme crossword for them, only about 3 or 4 a year for their quarterly. And they said, well, really, you don't need a linguist. You actually need a puzzle maker, someone who's good with anagrams, someone who can play with words rather than, know the intricacies of a word's backstory. So they asked me to audition, and I was given just these jumbled letters. And even if I didn't see a 9-letter word, which I tended to find anyway, I was also playing around with what else was in there and all the other words and all the other things you could do with those words. Then I didn't hear from them for a month. So I thought, oh, well, one person's geek is another person's freak. Then they gave me a ring, and they must have thought, let's give them a go. So that is how a puzzle job, particularly one that was kind of good karma, ended up being a TV job. And then that came and went, the first iteration of Letters and Numbers. furious 18 months, 550 episodes, a lot of fun. But then they pulled the pin on that back in, I don't know, 2010 or something. But there was enough momentum. My books were starting to appear. I had more of a media profile than I did as some crossword guy that no one had never met. Then that gave me a bit more momentum to get into radio. I love broadcasting. So I started on community radio for a year or two and started pestering the ABC, and they started giving me more gigs. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to take on the evening show, which was not a job I was expecting, you know, as a one-time sports writer and teacher, making crosswords on the side, suddenly being a, you know, prominent puzzle head, you know, TV personality, and now radio host. It's been a really mad, late blooming of a wordy career.
Well, congratulations. And there must be so much work involved too, because your radio show it's not just wordplay, it's everything, really.
Yeah, I love it. You know, I like talking to beekeepers, helicopter crash survivors, First Nation playwrights, Ecuadorian activists. I love it because it, you know, in the same way that we love reading books, it makes you understand the world a little more and gets you out of the white noise of your own head.
I'm very interested in how people like you who do a lot of different things and clearly work very hard. I'm interested in how you find that discipline. In fact, a couple of episodes ago, I asked Anthony Horowitz this question: how do you find the discipline to do all this work? And he just batted the question away, really, saying there's no discipline involved because I just love doing all these things. I imagine you would say something similar because I can see your enthusiasm for everything.
Yeah, it's my physio, Tony. I think he's 70 this year. Sadly, I've been having to visit Tony a little more often the last 5 years because playing touch rugby, I used to be very sporty, but you know, when you're middle-aged, soft tissue injuries tend to recur. But I said to him, you know, why aren't you traveling Sweden with your wife? You know, what are you still doing in this bloody room? You know, telling me to flex my knee. And he said, mate, it's just what I love doing. I couldn't think of doing anything better. Now that may, to some, mean a limited imagination, but to me, it just made perfect sense. I know we say, you know, human being, not human doing, but part of who you are is what you do. And I know that all the things that I'm doing now, while it is at times, you know, tough to balance them all, I love the fact that I've got such a, you know, blessed load to carry because it doesn't feel heavy at all.
Yeah, that's great to hear, because I think that's the key to well, it's key to being an artist. It's key to doing anything, I guess, in life. You have to enjoy what you do.
I think that's very true. And it's as a former, you know, tutor of writers, creative writers and journalists, it's those who not only have that, you know, that talent, which is a bit uncanny. Talent's an uncanny thing. So they've been blessed for, you know, having the capacity, having the proclivity and the prowess. But when you can combine that with the perseverance and the hunger, oh my God, you know, that is a double threat. And you see, in every class, there'll be 3 out of 30. So it's 1 in 10. You get some who are very persistent, who you know, have got middling talents, and they will improve and improve and improve. I'd rather have that you know, mindset than someone who's got talent and thinks that's enough, or why bother, or what am I going to do with my life? Man, you've got talent, you've got incredible talent, don't waste it. So I've always been a hard worker, and I've always loved language. So yeah, the two just amalgamate.
Well, I mustn't keep you too much longer, but so one final question. Really, I'd just like to know what's next. What else are you working on? What else are you going to do? More crosswords, I imagine. Plenty of them.
Yeah, there are plenty of those. I guess for me, it's after all the 13 or 14 years of word columns, the last thing I want to do is bring out this drab compilation. So what I'm arguing with myself and discussing with my wife, who's an editor and a publisher, is how can I transform all these riffs. I've got so many great riffs about slang, cliche, kid speak, family dialect. How do they all sit together into one big narrative rather than just a pastiche? So as soon as I figure that puzzle out, it's either going to be called Dear Word Nerd or Wordzilla. It's just got to be about words, but it really is as much a column memoir, or column, a coalition of columns. But it can't seem like that, because I wouldn't necessarily pick that book up myself. So that's my manuscript that I'm trying to conquer. And they'll probably have to drag me out of the studio in a box, radio or TV, or just ghost me, and I realise that I'm moribund, because I just love both those jobs so dearly.
Well, David, it's been fascinating, and I'll say it again, I'm blown away by the way you think, and not just how smart you are, but how inventive you are on the fly. It's inspiring. It really is.
Well,
so
thanks.
Thank you so much,
Anthony. The last thing I was going to do was do a number on you, because your surname starts with a number, ether, a number, and finishes with a word that means trendy, and you are trending as an incredible figure, not a number, of wordplay too. I'm a ready retweeter of your work, because I've always been a huge admirer, which is an anagram of married. I'm not going to get conjugal on you, but I'm just going to say keep conjugating. Yeah, you're an amazing artist, and it's been a real pleasure to talk with you.